Las Vegas, everything's great, you've got a fabulous day, you've got a comprehensive team back home that's running your business. But lo and behold, you get the message that Amazon suspended your account, and you have absolutely no idea why, because it's a completely generic response from Amazon, and you believe you literally have done nothing wrong. Now what? Please.
Okay, so most of the times when I get those phone calls and those messages are out of nowhere, no response, we review the information you provided and you no longer can sell on Amazon. When that happens without any communication, that basically means that you're suspended and there's no room for an appeal. Now, I know people are very into, were you suspended, were you terminated, were you banned? Being suspended and then being reinstated is not like a human heart. A heart, once it stops, can't go back. So you could be suspended and terminated and blocked and all these different names. Ultimately, it's just a button. If they tell you that you can't appeal, you're going to have a tough time getting back, but dozens just that I've worked that I've gotten back. What I would do initially, if you absolutely do not want to contact anybody on this stage, is look at the last communication you had with Amazon. Typically, what I've seen when it's one of those, when you get that message, it's like a lights out, nice knowing you message. Typically, when that happens, it's one of three things. Either you just got reinstated and you swore on your life that you'll never list Nike again, and like 5 minutes later you started listing all the Nike items, and they're like, it's nice knowing you. That's one. Number two, I would look closely at my last communication with Amazon submitting documents. If you forge a serious document, like a safety document, or if you forge something on your ID, that's an ultra serious thing, and and you're not going to get back. So I would definitely look at that. And so those are two of the main things what I would look at. But very rarely, after a deep dive, it was a phone call like someone on the stage, would it be that the guy did nothing wrong. Normally, it's the guy wants to know how he got caught and which of the three things they got him on.
Peter, Chris?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things. One, if you wake up on a Tuesday and your account's been suspended for absolutely no reason, you do want to take a minute to look at any correspondence you've had with Amazon, because it's quite possible you did get warned. It's usually at the very bottom of an email, and it's just very subtle. It says, if you continue to do this, we'll remove your selling privileges. So that's your warning right there, and it could have been 6 months ago. They're not in the business of, someone during James Kelly's presentation asked if there was somebody who's actually looking at their account. And unfortunately, Amazon's not in the business of manually doing anything. They want to automate everything. And so often what will happen is it's a machine learning, an algorithm, and it's very possible that it's a mistake. That if you did truly not do anything, you've got no warnings, you haven't submitted falsified documentation that gets approval to sell in topicals, something like that, and they truly did make a mistake, you need to call them out on it. And it's really important for you to understand the language that Amazon uses internally to communicate with each other. There's a thing called the Amazon Leadership Principles. There's 14 of them. You need to know those because that's the language that Amazon uses internally. And so if you feel like you did nothing, you do need to do a deep dive. You do need to understand what your business is because they know what your business is. And if you think that you didn't do anything, you need to come back and tell them that this is the result of a false positive. Those are the two words you absolutely want to use. This is a false positive, and this is why we think it's a false positive, and that this is a mistake, and you need to reinstate our selling privileges immediately. And you need to be very direct. You don't want to be rude, but you don't want to make any mistakes. And so if you really truly think and you did nothing, you need to make sure that that's true. If you did do something, you absolutely need to own it, whatever it is, because they know you did it, and that's why they're shutting you down.
Yeah, usually there's something there. I'm not just speaking because I used to work on seller performance. I'm as critical of seller performance as anybody on the stage, and many people sitting here. Often, most of the time, I would say, when people contact me saying, I haven't done anything, I got suspended, There's no rhyme or reason, there's no information. Once I'm working with them, I'm in their account, I'm looking at some of the ASINs, I'm looking at some of the previous warnings. I already, within minutes, start finding things that at least raise questions. I'm not saying that I'm not saying these suspensions are 100% defensible. A lot of times, as Peter's saying, they're using heavy-handed enforcement, or it could be a mistake. Sure, I mean, mistakes happen. But typically, there's a basis for it. You might not agree with what they see, but they see something, and they're using that as a basis for that action. And of course, my first level of advice would be, don't rush and hit that appeal button and say, I know exactly what they need to hear. I've seen it on the groups. I've seen it in this Facebook group, on seller forums. You could easily be comparing apples to oranges. They want customized language, but also detailed information that pertains to just your account. You might think, I've got a buddy who sells in this category. He had the same problem last week. This is exactly what happened to him. Don't enter into the appeals process with any, first of all, hasty actions to appeal right away, because 90-something% of those just get kicked back to you. Don't enter in with preconceived notions about reading Amazon's mind, knowing exactly what they want, just because you're anxious about not selling again. I mean, take a moment, take a breath. If you can, talk to somebody who kind of does this every day and understands the dynamics of the communication element, not just the talking about what you might have done wrong and giving them something generic that they want to hear, that you think they want to hear, because often they've seen that appeal 7 times in a row already, and the one you give them is some regurgitation of that, and it's not going to get you anywhere. So.
Okay, let's say I'm a private label seller. I make products, I've been making them for a while. Lo and behold, I'm starting to become rather successful with my brand. And out of the blue, I get this whole swath of product not authentic complaints from customers. But I make my own product. Apparently they're not authentic. What exactly is it that I'm supposed to do to not only fight off these initial complaints, but also help to set the stage with Amazon that maybe I'm under attack unfairly?
Okay, I'll take that one. It could be a dirty seller trick. There's a lot of things that can be going on in this situation. You're suddenly getting a whole bunch of inauthentic complaints. You could be dealing with a competitor who's trying to take you out. And to solve the immediate problem, of course, you can prove that your product is authentic. So if you're a brand and you're registered with Brand Registry 2.0 and you own your listings, and you can prove to Amazon that these are your products, it's not hard to prove authenticity. Unfortunately, most of my clients are not that buttoned up. And so a lot of them, maybe they're Brand Registry 1.0, or they just have a common law trademark. And so they're running into these problems. So the first thing I always have my clients do is get their ducks in a row. Go ahead and get your ducks in a row. If you're serious about building a brand on Amazon, why don't you have your trademarks registered already? So we get that, we get people on Brand Registry 2.0, that helps with the authenticity issue. But likely if they're getting a lot of claims, they have another problem to deal with, is they've got a dirty competitor somewhere out there trying to make their life miserable. And so if you want Seller Performance to understand that you're under attack, what I usually do is get my client back first, get the listing back, and then we file a complaint either with the policy, through the policy violation in Seller Central, or we have a couple of emails that we use that inside of Amazon for abuse situations. And we basically tell them, look, here's what happened. It looks suspicious. Can you please look into it for us? Because we suspect that something is going on here. And but the first thing you always want to do with Seller Performance is fix the problem, and then you want to tell them, we're also having problems with someone else. And I just wanted to add something to the first thing that we were talking about. I will say about 2 or 3 times a year, Amazon makes a mistake. It's a glitch. They send out an email to 10,000 million sellers that tells them they're all going to be suspended, and everybody freaks out. That's about 2 or 3 times a year, and it usually takes us a little while to figure out if it's a glitch or if it's just a new way of suspending. Like we just had one a few weeks ago. People were, screaming in the streets, right? I will let you know that Amazon very gracefully, was it on the seller forum, said, oh, whoops, sorry.
One thing
Sleep
about
well, sleep well, yeah.
exactly. One thing about if you are the brand owner and you're suddenly getting a bunch of inauthentic complaints, go back to that machine learning. Amazon is using the technology to monitor the performance of your product. You have to remember that Amazon's absolute #1 priority is protecting the customer experience. And so depending on what category you're selling in, there are greater sensitivities, especially in consumables. The threshold for tolerance in that space is tissue paper thin. I can speak to the experience on it. And why that is because those products can kill you if they aren't what they say they are. Because you're putting them in your body, you're putting them on your skin. And so Amazon would rather suspend your ASIN. So while it could be competitive, anti-competitive selling behavior, it could be that your product, something's gone wrong in your manufacturing or in your FBA shipment, there was something. And so it's really important before like this is anti-competitive behavior. It's really important that you deep dive into your business and know if it is something that you or your supplier has done. Because the technology that they're using, they can pinpoint the order that they're getting these complaints from and where they're coming back. And so we've done deep dives into businesses and said, this is anti-competitive behavior. We 100% completely believe that this is anti-competitive behavior. This is what we've done. This is how we're proving it. And they come back and say, actually, it's not. And we can tell you that it was from this order. And sometimes they'll give us the order ID, and then we're able to go back in and then we go and deep dive into the actual performance of the manufacturing, and we see things have gone wrong. And then the thing that is important, though, is to own that and say, like, we made a mistake. We thought it was anti-competitive behavior. We didn't dig deep enough into our business. We did uncover that this is the reason why, and these are the things that we did to prevent it from happening.
Yeah, I would say that as a seller, I used to think 90% of the times when I received inauthentic complaints, somebody's trying to kick me off. I would say now that I'm on the other side of things, 98% of the time it is not. Most people do not, are not out to get you. If it's possible, you will know. And people are scared of getting in trouble from Amazon. And I spoke to somebody in Amazon, and he said that the data which they use for the inauthentics, they deep dive it is something like 98% correct. So when they send you these inauthentic complaints, everyone says right away, it's either this competitor or that competitor, and really they have to look in the mirror and they'll know who it is.
Yeah. I mean, you should be able to knock down, if it's your own, you said private label product, you should be able to knock down any allegation of fake from a competitor by showing supply chain documentation. You have this product manufactured, your trademark registered. I mean, that in and of itself shouldn't be difficult to turn back if, unfortunately, it happens. Whether it's anti-competitive behavior or a buyer simply misunderstanding your product. But as Peter was saying a moment ago, understand that some of these not as described complaints are people maybe who misunderstood the listing and then reporting it, using certain keywords to Amazon that comes out as inauthentic because Amazon needs a catch-all category for item quality complaints, sometimes item condition complaints if it wasn't properly secured in the packaging and it gets damaged on its way to FDA or on its way to you. So inauthentic, to us it means out in the world, Amazon's cracking down on counterfeit. They have lots of bad press about that. They have to do something about it. So they're being extra aggressive in terms of enforcement. Often in our research with our clients, what we find is, we can dig into Seller Central and find return reasons and find why they thought the item wasn't as described. Sometimes it's really just about the quality of the item versus what they paid for it. So it's really just sort of a complaint about not liking it and saying, using language that Amazon understands, saying, well, it's not as described as, it's not as it was described on the website. Amazon uses the term inauthentic to cover for that, but you have to kind of do the homework, take the time, go through some of the pain, understand, well, if you're getting a lot of returns for that ASIN, what's going on with that particular ASIN? If you have multiple ASINs and you're getting returns and complaints and getting different notifications on them, you're down that path towards a suspension. There are ways of turning back and countering those, and of course, corresponding to seller performance is one of the things that my team is expert in, because we're all former seller performance investigators. So we know the communication angles, but you have to understand that if you just think it's one-dimensional, just somebody saying it's fake, just anti-competitive behavior, you're kind of missing the point. They're trying to put you on notice for, there's a problem, we've identified it, again, you might not agree with it, but you have to give us something back. You can't just stand pat or deactivate the listing and consider this done, I mean, that will still exist and live in your account annotations as a strike against you, something you have to take seriously. And it's one reason why I've spent a lot more time on preventing suspensions at this point than just dealing with reinstatements. There are ways of turning back the tide once you're sort of teasing the algorithmic frontier of getting reviewed, manual review, that tends to lead to a suspension.
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to move on to, there's lots to talk about here, so I want to move on. Each of you, in one way or another, has mentioned Brand Registry. Brand Registry got relaunched as 2.0 a little over a year ago. It does certain things, it doesn't do other things. Many private label sellers in the room. Can we get clarification on what is Brand Registry 2.0 supposed to do for you?
Sure.
What is it definitely not supposed to do for you? And what realistically can you expect it to do for you as a private label brand?
Sure. So, brand registry is not a brand gating tool. Just while a lot of people think that that's what it is designed to be, it is not. It is designed to protect your intellectual property, your word mark or image mark, and how that's being improperly used on the platform. And you're a competitor and you're using the competitor's brand name in the title, or you're using their images on your detail page. It is not designed to knock off other sellers. Amazon has a really, really strict, if you look at their terms of service, they do not enforce or acknowledge distribution agreements or exclusivity. So Cynthia talked about if you're a brand registry and you own the detail page, you don't own your detail page. It is part of Amazon's catalog, and you're giving Amazon rights to your intellectual property and worldwide. It's crazy the language around it, but go look it up. So the thing that's important about it, though, is that it does give you visibility into how your brand is being used on Amazon, and if there are other sellers who are using it to sell their products, and in times that can be that they are using it and selling pirated material. It's important to recognize that inauthentic is not pirated, it's not counterfeit. Inauthentic is, gray market, diverted inventory, and brand registry is designed to help you protect that intellectual property.
Well, what is Brand Registry effectively doing today? Obviously, what it was meant to do and what Amazon is actually effectively enforcing through Brand Registry. Where might there be a disconnect, and what should private label sellers today expect? They should be able to get certain rights from Amazon because they've done the hard work of getting that U.S. registered trademark, filling out the paperwork, getting it all right, getting signed off by Amazon. Now what?
Should I take that?
Please, Cynthia.
Okay, well, there's always the gap between what the intention was and how it actually operates. And we knew when they launched that it was going to be a bit of a cluster because they always launch things not quite finished. But I will say now that it's been not quite a year, but quite a while in, that Brand Registry 2.0 is working pretty well. And what it's meant to do is, of course, let you protect your intellectual property on the market, on the marketplace. And I know Peter corrected me, it's true, nobody owns a listing on Amazon. What I meant by that is that no one else can go and change it on you. So when you create your enhanced brand content, and you make it really pretty and you set it up the way you like it, nobody else can go in and change it on you. And so that is a huge benefit of Brand Registry 2.0. And the pages are gorgeous, and you can do Amazon storefront. And so they're bringing new marketing things that you can do all the time to Brand Registry. And so I recommend that people get in there as soon as they can for their brand, just because they can make beautiful pages. And then the other thing is, you can enforce, if you have trademarks that are being violated on the platform, you can enforce, and Amazon actually makes it, in the beginning, shall we say, too easy. They made it incredibly easy to enforce, and some brands, either out of ignorance or malice, enforced too easily. And so they left a lot of sellers in a bad place, and it wasn't their fault. So things are evening out a little bit now. Many of them are much better at enforcing selectively and enforcing properly. But what we were finding is that people would just say, oh, well, I'll just file a trademark infringement, take everybody off, and then I'll be the only seller. Yay, yay me. And that is against Amazon's rules. Because if they're not violating trademark, then you can't take them down. And other people are allowed to sell on your listings if they're selling your product.
Yeah, there's a lot of bad advice out there. I mean, just like I said earlier, I mean, there's Facebook groups, there's seller forums, there's experts all over the place. But take it with a grain of salt, do your homework, don't just sort of hang your hat on one thing one person tells you because another seller confirms it for you, not to step on what you're saying. But I can't emphasize it enough, and especially in the trademark example, lots of people were, or at least some people who were visible, were pitching services around this stuff that weren't compliant. Sellers either weren't trademark trained or they talked to the wrong attorney, whatever it might have been. They got into trouble for this, and they got into trouble, really unfortunately, just because they believed something that was outside of their area of expertise. And I'm not just saying that because I'm a seller performance expert. I'm saying I'm not an attorney. I'm saying it because we all have to kind of be responsible for what we believe and what we don't. A lot of people pushing different kinds of content out there. There's webinars, there's YouTube videos, it runs the gamut. But just understand, get different opinions. Get opinions from people who have worked at Amazon. Get opinions from people who haven't worked at Amazon, but who know what they're talking about. I mean, Cynthia said you've been a seller since 2010. Yeah. So she's been doing reinstatement work longer than I have. She was reinstating sellers back when I was working at Seller Performance, but she knows a lot of this material. So it doesn't necessarily mean you have to get somebody who did the work or suspended you themselves, but there's a lot of noise and there's a lot of noise pollution. So just make sure you cover the bases before you make really important decisions with your business.
It basically just prevents your page from being hijacked. Which I know many sales dealers, you wake up one day and you have a high-ranking item that all of a sudden changed. So that's not going to happen if you're brand registered. But if somebody, there's a big difference between counterfeit and somebody reselling your item even if you don't like it. Yeah, sums it up.
I need to move on.
Yeah.
This is good stuff, but I need to move on. I want to drop the Bezos escalation bomb. So certainly seen webinars, Facebook, this and that. And everybody says the solution to everything when I have to go nuclear is a Bezos escalation. Tell me a little bit about what is a Bezos escalation today, and what is it really meant for?
Peter and I
Just
just
by the way,
video
have any of you had to do a Bezos escalation?
Anybody email Jeff at
Email Jeff?
Amazon.com? So can I explain?
Finding it?
Yeah.
Let me explain first what a Jeff Bezos
A lot of
escalation is.
misconceptions about this.
I've personally lived through 6.
On the receiving side at Amazon?
Yes.
Yes.
So my first
He probably
Bezos.
delegated them to my team, right?
No, these are a little different. This actually kind of connects to what we just talked about with regards to brand registry. So a Jeff Bezos escalation is when you email Jeff at Amazon.com, and it goes to his executive relations team, and most of them get pushed to him, where then he reviews it and responds with either a question mark or a smiley face. They get waterfall, cascade down to the SVP, to the VP, to the director, to the person who's responsible for it.
How far down were you? I know it slides all the way down.
All the way
You have
down.
to CC like 64 people when you investigate these accounts and find a response. Which,
My first Bezos escalation was a Friday afternoon. I was on the bus and I got an email from my manager, and he's like, "Hey, we need to talk about this." And so I read through it. And I was like,
yeah.
and it was a situation where a seller had written in for a UPC exemption. Back in the day, you could get UPC exemptions. That's what kind of led to brand registry, was recognizing brands that don't have UPC codes. Anyway, the seller wrote in to us asking for a UPC exemption. The long story short is he sat there waiting for 2 months for a response from my team, which I did not know that was part of my team, because the teams that were handling that were in North Dakota. They deprecated that team, didn't migrate it over to ours. So the message of that is that it's just like there's so many moving parts. So what eventually happened with that Jeff Bezos escalation, though, is we had to basically pull back everything that we were doing, and we looked at the fact that these sellers, there were 1,500 of them, along with this one person who managed to email Jeff, waiting for a UPC exemption. And what it turns out was that we didn't have a system in place, and so we needed to relook at our business and restructure how we were managing this inbound queue of emails. And so they work, they do. However, and Amazon uses that feedback to change and to update. I think the problem with what Jeff Bezos escalations are now is that there are a lot of, especially in the seller performance space, there are a lot of consultants or experts who immediately think that the answer to your problem is to escalate to Jeff Bezos. And where we're at now versus when I had that escalation a few years ago, is that the space has changed significantly. And that there are a lot of sellers who aren't taking responsibility for what they do, and they immediately send it off to Jeff Bezos. And it gets intercepted by an executive relations team, and it never actually gets to Jeff Bezos. And the problem that you face if you do try to escalate something is that your team, you're now putting your situation in front of arguably a more experienced and somewhat more knowledgeable group of seller performance. And so your message had better be really good. You can't complain. And so you can't just willy-nilly fire off a Jeff Bezos escalation. You have to have, basically write a 2-page document. It's in Amazon, the way that they communicate is everything will be a written document, telling them why you are escalating it. And you really only have one shot, because all of the actions that you do get annotated to your account. Amazon's a firm believer that previous performance is an indicator of future performance. So they're documenting everything that you do. Nothing goes away. You know, like you get an ASIN reinstated, it's not erased. They can go back and see 6 months later ago you have this ASIN reinstated. So they're going to see this pattern. We're like, oh, Jeff B escalation. Oh, Jeff B escalation. Oh, Jeff B escalation. And all of a sudden, they're going to start using that keyboard key, ignore. And they're just going to ignore. And there's nothing you can do at that point, because no one else is going to get attached to it and want to be like, hey, you know what? You shouldn't have ignored that Jeff Bezos escalation for the 6th time. So you've got to be really careful about it. You can't just
Okay, so
do it.
give me an example, a reasonable example where a seller should be filing a Jeff Bezos escalation.
I'll pick that.
Sure, Sue.
Okay, so there are definitely times where they should. Like, if you're sending an appeal to seller performance and you just keep getting back over and over again the same, we need more information, which is seller performance speak for piss off. And I don't have time for you. And so, because it's not being read. And, you know, it really isn't. It's just like, okay, ball's in your court. And so, you can go back and forth with them for a while. But then you might want to try to escalate. And there's a way to escalate before going to Jeff. There are intermediate escalations, which we do because they're much more successful. And also, if my client's account is going to be annotated, I want the Jeff Bezos team to see that they did try first with regular seller performance and then with escalated seller performance. And then, so I want them to see that, my client has been trying to be heard. And also, you need to make sure that you really have a story to tell, like Peter said. So if you have a really good case for getting reinstated and you're not taking responsibility for what you did, I am going to tell you, do not send it to Jeff. But I also, I wouldn't be helping you anyway if you weren't taking my advice. So, but basically, you've got to have a good case. You have to really dig deep and figure out what happened. And there are times when it does make sense to send it to Jeff because it's just not getting heard. And you know that if somebody actually saw, like if you have a really complicated case, I've had a few of those where the complexity of the case almost guaranteed that nobody would read it. And so, honestly, these guys have 3 minutes to go through an appeal.
Yeah.
And so if they don't have time, it's just going to be next. So those are the cases where we might do a Jeff, because at least we have the hope at that point that somebody will read the complexity and get it and say, oh, okay, and make a decision.
Right. If I can jump in.
I don't think we're saying, go ahead.
Okay, I'm sorry. Now, if I can just, with seller performance, there isn't, there are different approaches. There isn't like one way is right. But respectfully, I think, if I have two sellers and one person and one business within 2 business days, got 5 denials and requests for more information. And then another business was out for 7 days, and they got 1 response, a denial and request for more information. Who lost more money? The one that's out for 7 days. And the fact that Perfomance is frustrating you, and the fact that as long as they keep responding, if they're talking to me, I'm talking to you. That's mine. And as long as regular Perfomance still is asking for more information, I would not escalate it until I get final word. The final word is Amazon speak for saying that we reviewed your information and you've lost your selling privileges and you may not respond. You know, like when you're in a relationship and 2 people are fighting, it's better, at least there's hope because they know each other, that they're fighting. But once they stop talking, that's when there's trouble, there's real trouble, and they're not going to get back. Seller Perfomance is the same thing. As long as they're going back and forth, I would not waste that final bullet with Jeff. I would keep responding until they say, have a nice life. At that point, once they final word with me, I would go to Jeff.
I mean, once you're final worded, that can be too late, though. I mean, sometimes you've already lost weeks of selling, or you've lost that ASIN for a long time. I don't think we're saying, James, that never appeal to Jeff, never do these types of escalations. No, we're saying do it the right way, and we're saying don't do it prematurely.
Yeah.
So if you're, even backing up, stepping back for a second, escalate with something good, with good content, a good plan of action, which is a word we haven't brought up yet, but escalate with a plan of action that's worth their time, that they can use to reinstate you. They can't reinstate you based on a 50% there, 60% there plan of action. That can blow up in their face if you go straight down the tubes the next week, right? Think about investigators, how much time they have to look at your account. Think about if they're going to be on the hook for reinstating you with a plan of action that any audit would determine by a higher up was not viable, was not a complete plan of action. They just rushed it and they went through it, they reinstated you, and all hell broke loose after you got back on, or you went back to committing the same violations you were committing before, or listing mistakes, whatever it might have been. So you have to escalate with a good POA. The advice that drives me crazy, I'm thinking about all the Bezos escalations I worked on when I worked there and all the ones I've seen since. So many thoughts going through my head. My caution to you is don't just listen to somebody who says, oh, I wrote to Jeff, I got right back on. Or you have to take it to Jeff, you have to escalate it. What are you escalating with? Is your plan of action worth the paper it's printed on? I had to create a whole separate service just to have people send me these things so I can just read through them before you send it, because this could be your last chance. And you don't want to sort of burn that last opportunity to get back on when you could have really just spent a little bit more time in the plan of action, gotten yourself a much better chance because you had something to escalate with. You had a good escalation, which is one thing, and a good plan of action, which is the second document. 2 things, not just one. And a lot of people don't even understand that dynamic.
So I've had sellers, when I was at Amazon, sellers come to me and they got themselves in trouble. They say, well, I need to have a plan of action. I say, well, you have a bad warehouse, you don't have enough employees checking certain things, you're not looking at your listings properly. Okay, fine. 2 days later, I've hired somebody, I have a 3PL, and I'm good to go. Now what? I put that all in a plan of action. Yep, check. I've acknowledged all the things that Amazon says I don't know how to do well. I maybe haven't actually done all those things. Now what?
I think it's important to recognize that if there are certain things in your plan of action that do take time, like hiring new people, finding a new warehouse, to realistically submit a plan of action 2 days later is just garbage. And these people are looking at that and they're saying, that doesn't pass the sniff test. There's no way you could have done that in 2 days.
It has to be credible.
It does. I think the thing that's important to recognize about Jeff Bezos escalations is that the question that you should be asking is when and why. And it really comes down to Amazon does have SLAs, service level agreements, where internally where they're saying, his team they have 7 days to review this or that sort of thing. When you escalate, you want to be able to show, I've done everything. I've implemented this plan of action. And then you want to show and tell where they're breaking their systems, where their systems are failing, and these are the reasons why you are being forced to escalate this, because something that Amazon is supposed to be doing is failing, and that this is why you're calling it out. I'm escalating because we have done this. It's been 2 weeks. We've hired new staff. We launched a new, 3PL company. We've done all of these things, and no one's responding. So I'm escalating because it's creating a terrible seller experience.
So seller performance is an organization that looks at rules that are meant to govern what happens on the third-party marketplace. And Amazon Retail is a very aggressive competitor. And Amazon Retail does things that if the seller did those things, we get the seller in trouble. And yet, if I'm a brand registry owner, I've got my brand, and Amazon goes out and sources counterfeit product of my brand and sells it, I can't get that addressed through seller performance particularly easily. What are the kinds of things that I can use seller performance for to help protect against actions of Amazon Retail?
Well, I'll take that one.
Please.
Well, first of all, most of the times when that happens, it's somebody selling it through Vendor Central. It's not like somebody in Amazon is sourcing it